So then we got therapy. That's where we're at. I wake up today, 10 minutes till therapy. And so glad I take notes. I have not paid yet. We spoke about everything happening. Reading notes from Vinny from when I was unconscious. I really appreciate them. So then we spoke about everything happening. Like, at first I was like, I woke up and realised that I'd been like near dormancy for 2 days, 3 days, an amount of time that I had not realised. And our therapist was like, oh shit, like what, you know. She didn't actually say oh shit, but she is the sort of person that like I think she could have. But she was like, oh wow, you know, what happened? I was just like, you know, cute Indigo Montoya moment, just like, let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me summarize. Like, okay, so we spent like 4 hours writing out making sure that everything was in order in the timeline typed up of abuse from the photo cunt, and the how, where, when, why style interview questions that the police ask you. Like 4 hours typing that up. So fucking proud of us. It gave us 3 days of migraine where we were just literally out of it on pain meds, but it was so entirely worth it because that is now handed into evidence and uploaded. And we're just waiting for her to contact again for the next step, which is like, we don't have to do anything for a while now. We've done like all of the really hard stuff, and also it's really cool to have like such an account of what happened for our whole life, and instances of like profound trauma typed up that we can send to our therapist to go over with her. Not yet, because we were taken out of our body like so many times writing it. We could integrate some of it, but some of the abuse was like too fucking profound to stay in our body with, and we'd be protectively dissociating even from it. So I'm looking at like maybe years from now we go over that with our therapist, but either way, the fact that it's there and we can review it with her when we're ready is really cool. And the fact that we've done so much work to fight in our defense is really fucking cool. So there was that. And she was like, wow, that's a lot. I was like, nowhere near done. Nowhere near done. Then there was like the 3 days of migraine and fucked up dreams, and then there was like all of this fresh bullshit with people that we were very close to, that we really trusted in our family, that we thought knew us very well, spouting complete victim blaming, character assassinating, behaviorally pathologizing bullshit at us without, and framing it as if they want a conversation, but coming at us with accusations right off the bat. So it's kind of always been done like that. So like a lot of the time in our family we've had things like, no, we just want what's best, we just want this, and that's how it's framed. But at the same time, you're being like gaslit or blamed or dismissed, and it's like really fucked up and convoluted as an experience. It's only clear to us now after so long out of it and so much integration and so many years of therapy and so much research on abuse dynamics. So then we explained all of the situation. We didn't go over all of the text because like there's so much that it's going to take a few therapy sessions. But we brought up like a couple of highlights, and our therapist was like, that sounds like being pelted and like sort of avalanched with shit. And we were like, yeah, that's a good way to frame it. She was like, I'm thinking of like a blizzard, like when you're in it. And I was like, that's a really good way to phrase it. As she said it, I could feel it and I could see it. Like, so we have this really cool layer that we've always been able to operate on. It's like, it's not like, it sort of functions with a similar law to the headspace, like somewhere between the headspace and imagination, but like kind of just visualization, I guess. But it's not like just imagining and visualizing something, because it's way more tangible than that, and stuff plays out in a vibrancy and a tangibility and a realistic fluid detail that just happens, that I don't have to put into action. I just watch it occur, and it's very real. And like, we probably used it to escape into our own worlds and our own stories and our own plots our whole lives. And now it's like very much a therapeutic tool that we use in visualization, or that happens sometimes. Like, sometimes I just see stuff happen in that layer when I'm asked. So as she said it, I was like, oh yeah, that feeling that I experience as like a typhoon, cyclone, whirlwind spinning me round, and like I describe it often feeling like that. And she said, so, what would help for today? And I thought about it for a while. And I was like, I don't know. I know that at the minute I'm struggling to integrate these opposing things into to being able to hold them in one person. And I need to be able to hold them in one person to be able to work with them. So it feels like in the adult parts of me that would identify as a persecutor, the parts that were exiled, I don't have the connection to the family, so I have nothing to grieve, because I haven't lost anything other than being scapegoated and like having bullshit assigned to me under the guise of being worried and being told that I'm the problem. And I'm clear on our reality, but I can't grieve because the grief isn't in me. And then I was like, it's nice because it's not like where it was before, it's more in me now, and that's so much better. But at the time in the session, I was like, slightly to the right of me and about here, slightly to the right of me and about here, I feel pain, but I'm not experiencing it as my pain. But I'm very aware that this is like, I think, a young part of me, or young parts of me, a young part of me maybe, who is feeling this pain and this loss and has this attachment to our family and this overwhelming amount of grief for everything they've done to us. But the reality is so shaky after years of being fucking gaslit that that part also can't really grieve, because it hits a safety level instead of an emotional level, and we start feeling like unsafe and worried for what's happening, instead of being able to be upset and process that. And reality is not clear, and we start feeling like, shit, maybe I'm the problem, as we've been conditioned to think. And then, so what I need really is these things, these parts, to be able to come together with what we hold. And our therapist was like, what would it be like to move into that space physically? So I was like, okay, interesting. So I like got up and moved over and sat down. And when I sat down like I felt much smaller and much lower. And she was like, it's interesting, you got a lot lower. And I was like, yeah, I felt that. And I also felt very, very sad and very alone, and like that panic sped up feeling like the swirling flurried snow of a cyclone and a snowstorm that she was very accurately talking about, that I was feeling, felt like I was just dropping through the floor, and like I was just sinking and continuing to sink, with everything going higher around me and this intensity moving around me that I couldn't think with, and this panic inside of me, of this racing, panicked, unfair, unjust, unseen, disbelieved feeling, like everyone else towering threateningly over me, but also simultaneously overlooking me, everything moving really fast. And this feeling of complete abandonment and being so alone and so sad and so scared. And I recognized that I had felt this way throughout so many moments in our childhood, and that this being texted with a lot of what these texts said on our aunt's behalf by this person was triggering this feeling that was so familiar to this part of me. And then I recognized that, like, as the adult parts of me, both adult parts, it had felt like I was being pulled into the cyclone tornado and spun around in it. But for the younger part of me, it felt like I was being pulled down just through the center of it, with that going off around me rather than being in it. And at that point, I think she said, "What would the snow say if the snow could say something?" And I tried to think about that, but there was like so much uncertainty, so much lack of ability to trust what I was hearing and myself, and so many things going off all at once, so many overlapping, sped up, cycling words and voices, that the only thing I could clearly distinguish was the word keep. So I said that, and we were like, okay, so I wrote that down. And I'm going to show you the Google we did. The doodle. So I felt like I was here, and those are the adult parts that I felt like I was getting spun around it formally. But imagine all of this being like a blizzard of snow, and me here just sinking down into it. And she said, "What about the snow? Like, what about the bits in between the adult parts and the child part?" And I was like, the snow itself. And she was like, "Yes, the snow itself. Like, what is that? What are those parts?" And I hadn't thought of the snow itself as something or as parts of me, so that was interesting. And I thought about it, and I could see, it was weird because I could see Vince sort of within it and behind it at the same time, like just stood, like braced against it, but just stood, not really getting spun through it. Like his hair and clothes getting whipped around, but him just stood, like watching and just observing this happen. And I looked at the snow flying round wildly, and I managed to kind of, the visualization focused on one snowflake, and it went into it and zoomed in, and it was like this dark black blue ice color. And when it zoomed in and expanded it, it became a memory, and it was a very specific memory. It was one that Vinny had vlogged about the other day, with where our cousin cut our eye with a toy sword, and we got triggered out, and Vinny attacked him back with one, and we got blamed for the whole event. And our cousin's response was kind of completely overlooked, or instigation of that event was completely overlooked, and our response was made the problem. And I zoomed back out, and I was back in the snowstorm going, and I was like, oh shit, they're memories. They're like, and I went into another one by, like, I would focus on it and it would just into me, and it would go from a snowflake to expanded into a memory. And the other one was the incident with the table where our cousin cut our hand and our aunt fucking praised him for hurting us. And that one was also like a dark black blue color. And I was like, oh shit, because it was this whole entire storm of snowflakes. And I noticed that when Vinny had that memory, I think he must have shared it because we've got enough communication now that we can sort of vibe stuff back and forth inside a bit. So I noticed him being like, oh, and sharing that when he'd had this memory, it had been rage and anger at the injustice and knowing we were right and this was fucked up. But when I was in it, it was like two different memories of the same event, because I felt this feeling of sinking down that I'm experiencing right now, that I'm like, not right now, but that in therapy I was experiencing right now, and that I was sitting in getting flashed back into, I guess. And I'm recognizing that it's the same feeling, that like all of these events bring the same feeling of being pulled down into it and alone, and this panic inside of everyone being against us and not being believed in anything and just being isolated and ganged up on and overlooked and attacked and alone. And I zoomed back out of that one and I realized that there were lighter coloured snowflakes as well. There were like some that were really light blue. And I went for one that was like light blue. And it was that I remembered feeding our cousin, because we're a couple of years, 3 years older. When we were kids, it felt like a big difference. It's now hard to tell. But when he was born, they used to let us like sit and feed him with the bottle and hold him, and the little bastard would like kick us to death if we stopped feeding him for even a second, which I thought was great. Like, you know, great self-advocacy. I was never unhappy about that. And we had this memory of just feeding him with the bottle, and sort of zoomed back out of that one and saw that there were other light blue ones attached to darker blue ones behind them, sort of in separate snowflakes but like falling together, and like everything's whipping around, so it's fucking chaotic still, feeling everything all like polarized but all at once, but one after the other, like rapid cycling instead of, you know, it's hard to explain, but very confusing, very chaotic. And I look at the one of them that's dark blue black, and it's that we wanted a hug at one point, and from our mum, we spent a lot of time like not really knowing how to ask for affection, and when we were upset and we didn't want a hug, she had this tendency to force them on us, and we were like claustrophobic, didn't want them, and she'd go, well, I don't care, I want one, and we'd be forced into it. But when we were like after comfort, it felt like it wasn't there. And there was this one time where we slept in our room, but then the abuse started to get really bad, went from grooming to like really fucked up shit, really overt, really dangerous abuse. And then we started having nightmares, and we'd sleep in her room. And I remember it being in this period of time where we like tried to have her put her arm around us and hug us, and she went, no, roll over and go to sleep, you never sleep on this side. And we were like, okay. So we like rolled over, and I remember feeling like crying and then just numb. And then next to that one, there was this light blue snowflake, which was like being at our cousin and our aunt's house, and they'd be quite cuddly and like invite us to lie in bed and have stories read, and our cousin was always like lying next to us and snuggling into us and like nicely affectionate, and we were both all in here so confused by it because we didn't really understand it or how to be like that at that point. And we were like, it was foreign, and it was so comforting, and it was like the most comforting, most family like environment that we knew, their house. And it was like the place where we knew the most physical affection and comfort and feelings of family and safety. I now know that like that evaporating, spinning feeling, like it was fleeting, and we'd be grasping, and it would be so often disturbed by feelings of fear and anger that until we felt embodied safety in the last 2 years, it doesn't compare. But for at the time, it was the closest thing we knew to it, the scraps of like safety and comfort. And there was all these memories, like we hated it when the mum would get drunk because it would amplify this feeling that I always had, like I was the only one that could see danger, and I had to be looking out for it all the time because the adults around me couldn't see it, which was true. And like I had to protect the adults and our mum from it as well as us, because she would be convinced that it was not dangerous, and it would make me feel more hypervigilant and more responsible whenever she'd drink, because it amplified that feeling. And there was this time where we were like, this is all really young, this is all below 8, below 7, I don't know what age exactly, but I know that they were drinking, and it was like 4 in the morning, and I was like, we couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep because I was like worried they were going to hurt themselves, worried something was going to happen. And I remember going into the living room. Our cousin also was awake, and we'd been playing through the house because we had like whole worlds that we'd build and enter together, and our toys would like, and probably people in this system would each have a toy of our own. So we had like groups of 5 or 6 or 7. And we'd explore the whole house. The stairs were big waterfalls. We'd have to find ways to make boats out of anything that was nearby. We had plot, we had lore, we had worlds. And we'd but I was getting like, too panicked from this. So I went in, and I can't remember how I said it, but I know I was like, I don't like this. And I think it was his suggestion that he was like, I want to go to the beach. And I was like, let's go to the beach. We were like, let's go to the beach. I think we grabbed like a bucket and a little shovel, and we just left the house, and we held hands and very carefully went across the road. Like we looked both directions very carefully, and we went through the little park bit, and we went to the beach, and we played in the sand and in the sea. It was ice cold, and he was like, I'm going in anyway. And we were like, oh God, I think we paddled a bit anyway. And then our aunt came and got us and was like silent and pissed, but did sit and like, because we were like, no, we're at the beach, we want to be here. And like she did sit and let us like play in the sand for a bit. And I think we watched the truck thing that like would scrape the sand come past. And it was just all of these really beautiful moments that are also tainted by so much. To me, it was like good memories, grief, and rage, all in separate parts, and all in separate snowflakes, and all in separate memories. And there was just loads of them, like all of these things that, and our therapist was like smiling, nodding, and she said, it sounds like, no matter what happens now, and no matter what has happened and what continues to happen, you do have a lot of really precious moments between you and your cousin. Those were real, and those still exist. Those don't just go. We don't just lose those precious memories and those precious moments where like those moments and the relationship with our cousin were so important to us, and those memories and moments always will be so important to us. I hadn't realized that it's like, if I'm seeing the good memory and then the grief of losing it, the good memory disappears, and then just the anger of having it change and go. So to me, it's like it was taken, and then I just grieve losing all of it. But I can see from this session now that it's like those memories are still precious. Those moments are still beautiful and were still necessary for... They were fucking wholesome and necessary and needed and vital to us. And nothing about that and what we meant to each other changes no matter what happens now. And we couldn't really see that before going dormant, I don't think. And our therapist said it might matter to slow down the storm to be able to hold on to the memories that are good. Maybe they're worth holding on to, you know? And as she said it, I saw Vince's eyes sort of clock, and he just went and everything just froze. Like the tornado winds just stopped, and every single flake of snow was just drifting slowly, like not still frozen, but gently frozen, gently drifting, like suspended in the air. And I was like, holy fucking shit. You're so casual when we're out here in the body together. I forget how much shit you can do in the inner world. And it is mind-blowingly amazing to see it in action. Like, the fucking power of this is just... It's so amazing. It's fucking awe-inspiring. And I tried to sketch it very quickly because I will probably be doing this more. And then we said goodbye to our therapist. She was really impressed and was like, wow. And I was just like, fucking thank you. I think meaning to him. It came out to him, and she said, you're welcome. And I realized it could be to both. And I was like, that tracks, that works. And he just sort of like stood there in this like suspended millions of snowflakes, and this young part of me was still like sat holding her knees. I felt like I'd moved back to an adult part that had dropped and joined more. So instead of being two completely separated, I felt more like it's like less apart, sometimes one. And I'm watching this young part of me in this sort of visualization layer sit with holding her knees, and Vince just like holds his hand out, and various blue, just the light blue snowflakes start coming together and form like this flurry into his hand and gently form this snowball. It's a very quick sketch. And then it kind of evaporates off the snow and looks like this kind of crystalline glass orb, but not fragile like glass, more like an energy bubble, but looking like the weight and shape of glass. Very difficult texture to describe. And inside it I can see these small sort of figure memories of us and our cousin, and all of these positive memories that still exist, that are still there and meaningful and real. And he just like knelt down and hands it to this young part of me and said, it isn't really just snow, it's a lot more than that. They won't melt away, and they're yours to keep. And I sort of watched the young part of me take it and hold it, and it like absorbed in. And then I felt like so many things: grief, relief, bittersweet joy. Not worry though, like it really did a lot to melt the anxiety I was feeling, and the racing has slowed and felt kind of more whole. And then we came out of therapy and we were telling this to Ryan, and we were like describing what had happened, and he was like, I hope that you'll have like be able to see the mix of the good and the bad, because it's not just one, like it's not just the good or the bad. And as he was saying this, I saw Vince like look back over his shoulder, and the darker memories, there was still some light blue left. He'd only taken like a made a snowball from them. There's still loads left, but the darker ones and the light ones that are still suspended in the air had started to make this very disturbing cracking noise, creaking, cracking, but not like the snowflakes themselves, like the air and the reality they are suspended in felt like they had started to crack like a glacier and go kind of like dark mauve red. And he was like, oh yeah, that doesn't look healthy. And he kind of like moved his hand through them, and they all felt like the texture experimented and moved a little bit before settling on this kind of like the way you can feel a cold air current, but like water, but able to be breathed in. It kind of turned to that and all just like dropped around us to this air liquid layer and mixed together completely randomly, nothing 50%, nothing 100%, but just this total mix. And then he kind of looked at me, and I kind of felt the vibe and was like, there was some agreement, and there was some agreement with more people, more of us over my shoulder, but I didn't look at the time, so I don't know who exactly. But I know that there were people behind me. And then all of these turned into like random sized balls of this liquid and went inside me, inside him, and inside several people over our shoulder, my shoulder, our shoulder, behind me. And I feel a lot denser, like more solid, more heavy, a lot less cognitively dissonant, and there's a lot less suspended disbelief. I feel a lot more whole in a lot of different ways, which both means feeling better and worse than before that. A lot more solid.